Here are the 10 things that you need to know about Airbnb's newest update. They've made 2. Today we're talking about their changes to the chargeback policy. Let's touch the cancellation policy later in the video. My name's Sean Rakiji. I've been a host for 10 years, and I'm the nerd that likes to tell you about everything that you need to know about Airbnb. And I want to first address the myth. This is not on the top 10 list, but I read in a Bigger Pockets article that people believe that on September 8th, when Airbnb changes their chargeback policy, that Airbnb could reach back multiple months and take back funds from a stay that you provide, but they get to keep their service fee, but then you have to pay the chargeback, and Airbnb would somehow find a way to keep the service fee. And that's actually not true. Airbnb could not charge back a card because a guest disputed it and then keep their fee. Unless it was potentially a services not rendered one, but that would be a long shot. But Airbnb would be mutually at fault for services not rendered on a card chargeback, so I don't think that they could keep the service fee, and we'll talk about that later on in the video. By the way, I got robbed this morning. I actually literally got robbed, so I had a video that I was going to post on this in a different computer, and I don't have it anymore, so that's why we're doing a live stream today, so please like the video. Maybe enough likes, I'll buy myself a new MacBook Pro. What do you guys think? So number 1 out of the things that you need to know is, of course, the policy itself. Airbnb is adding into their terms of service, September 8th, the clause that they are no longer financially responsible for chargebacks. Whether that's a dispute for credit card fraud or for services not rendered, okay? And so that's the quick and easy one. But second, Airbnb stays the merchant of record. Now, this is a big deal. Since Airbnb is staying the merchant of record, they get all sorts of power, control, authority, stuff like that. This is something that we're going to try to address on the host level. I think all of us hosts should try to change this. This would be in our best interest. Like if you have a channel manager and you're taking direct bookings, all of the like, and you have a payment processor like Payments by Guesty or Stripe, you become the merchant of record. And that distinction is huge here in the way that credit cards get handled and what power and authority you have dealing with chargebacks and claims of fraud. So we're going to try to blast through this one day and maybe get Airbnb to relinquish merchant of record authority if they misuse this chargeback thing. I think that this could be one of the dominoes that fall. Speculation. So number 3, because Airbnb's merchant of record, you do not get to capture the credit card information, and you do not get to ask Airbnb to give you that credit card information. They're not going to give it to you because, again, they're the merchant of record. This would be super good for us, like if a guest did claim fraud, right, that the credit card was stolen or that services were never rendered and they fraudulently said that, you would be able to go to ic3.gov and file a fraudulent chargeback claim, okay? We may need to take Airbnb to arbitration first in order to be given that information to then file criminal charges. I need to talk to an attorney to tell you if that's true or not, okay? So if a person does create a fraudulent chargeback, that actually is a crime. It's wire fraud. If it's over $2,000, it's a felony. So one of our ways that we could protect ourselves is to claim that we've been victimized of an actual internet-based crime, which is where you go to ic3.gov to file that. So this is something we will have a roundabout way to maybe get to, but it's not so easy yet, by the way. The laptop was 5-6 years old, so no lost love there, guys. So because Airbnb's merchant of record and Airbnb still charging everything, Airbnb still owns the float. This is another thing that we would like to have as hosts, okay? This is something that Airbnb makes a lot of their profit on. Airbnb collects all this money for every transaction, months and months and months in advance, and then they can invest that money, and then the day after arrival, as long as everything's chipper, we get paid. But there are months at a time where Airbnb gets to control this money. Now, Airbnb is giving people this option of buy now, pay later through things like Klarna or other services like that, which means that the guest doesn't have to have all the money, but there's now a chain of custody, you could say, in the transactional side. And this might actually be safer for us than I think other sites are really trying to claim that this is supposed to be scary. But if a company like Klarna or Affirm or some other company charges somebody on a payment plan, they have to pay us the full amount. So Airbnb is getting paid from a company to provide a payment plan to a guest, And then the guest, if they wanted to make a claim that like the credit card was stolen, they have to work through both Airbnb and that other merchant of record. And depending on how good that other company is, they might be able to not lock that away. They could always still claw back and say that services were not rendered. So, but I do think the payment plan, if somebody cancels in advance because they don't have enough money to service the payment plan, it's quite possible that Airbnb gets to keep the money in the middle and then we don't get any of it. Which then kind of creates this, like, I'm just going to kind of go tangential here, gives me a shitty response, right? Gives me a feel bad response that Airbnb did just change their cancellation policies to force people to be firm instead of strict, which means that we don't have as long of a window to get a partial payment for our listing. And a lot of you guys probably are going to be upset about that, right? So if Airbnb's got a payment plan with a third-party company that if somebody can't afford the Airbnb, the payment plan dies and they don't get a refund, well, Airbnb gets to keep all that money and we wouldn't be party to that, right? That would be kind of sad news that Airbnb used our listing as bait to get somebody to start a financing plan to stay at an Airbnb and then they get to keep all the revenue. So this is something that we as business owners can do. The reason why I'm telling you about the float is because if you had your own direct bookings and if you did collect money on Stripe or anything like that, like VRBO, Booking.com, all these places where you can become merchant of record, you would have your own float, which would be really, really cool. Airbnb makes a lot of money on their float. It's important for you guys to know. So number 5 is Airbnb will now also still be attempting to recover losses. Like I said, they're the merchant of record. They're the one that sees the cards. You don't get the cards. So Airbnb will be the one to try to win these chargebacks or to win these fraud claims. And if any of you think that Airbnb is just gonna like take it and like roll over, that's actually false. Airbnb will have a lot of money to lose in this chargeback cycle. So even though Airbnb's terms of service, you know, their service, what is 14, 15%, whatever, Airbnb still loses that money if somebody says that the credit card was stolen. If Airbnb said, like if somebody says that the services weren't rendered, Airbnb still has money to lose there. And so depending on how Airbnb behaves with their service fee for services not rendered, they also will open themselves up to liability of litigation from hosts if they behave inappropriately. So I do believe that 100% of a credit card loss, like Airbnb has to eat their 14% no matter what until they win that chargeback claim. And if they don't fight hard enough to win these chargeback claims, there's also a case of negligence there, which we're going to talk about here in just a second. So when Airbnb, this is number 6, the sixth thing you need to know is at the time that there is a loss, then yes, your account will get deducted. Airbnb will pass the buck to you if somebody says the credit card was stolen or whatever, and you will receive a temporary deduction while Airbnb is fighting that claim, and then they'll reward you the money if they can win. Now, this is all like, sure, we can have our response to this, we can have our opinions. Airbnb is really being greedy, really being selfish, really being risk averse by, you know, basically shortening the window which we can get paid for cancellations, changing the nature of how chargebacks work so they immediately de-risk financially. Because if a host was to change their bank account information or quit hosting while they're battling a chargeback, then Airbnb wouldn't be able to claw it back. Right? So they're immediately trying to de-risk anything where they could lose money, which is kind of odd because Airbnb's been doing better and better cash-wise. I think some of these are like just proactively anti-host measures that aren't because they're like losing in any big way. Not that they've reported. So it's really kind of shady, in my opinion, that they're doing it like that. So now, number 7, here's the fun stuff, guys. Happy 4th of July, David. Here's the fun stuff, guys. You could arbitrate against Airbnb for negligence, okay? The one I just alluded to is one, but there's another too. So if Airbnb doesn't do a good enough job fighting these chargebacks, then you could arbitrate for negligence. You can open an arbitration claim and then go through what's called a discovery phase, where discovery is where you seek all the documentation regarding your arbitration, where they have to disclose all the actions that they took in the chargeback cycle. They have to then be able to prove in arbitration that they properly sought remediation that was in your best interest instead of just letting it die. So if there's a chargeback and they don't fight the chargeback, you could go and hit them for negligence because they did not defend the chargeback at all and they just let it die, which means they owe you the money because they treated the chargeback negligently. Since you're not allowed to have the credit card information to fight the chargeback yourself, it is their duty to represent you in this cause. It's like their contractual obligation to not cause you harm through negligence in your contract. The second form of negligence that we can hit Airbnb with would be if we believe that, like, let's say there's a chargeback for a stolen credit card. Well, Airbnb would then be on the hook for making sure that payments used on their platform for reservations are not stolen or fraudulent cards. Airbnb gets the traveler's information, Airbnb gets the credit card information, and it's their job sometime before to stay to make sure that everything lines up, it's on the up and up, and that the card is not stolen. They can preemptively go through this process of making sure that everything is clean. And if they fail to do so, and they allow somebody to book with a stolen credit card and then stay, and then somebody on the back end claims that the card was stolen and charges it back, well, Airbnb can be hit with negligence there because they failed to protect the host from that situation, which it's within their power that they could protect the host from that situation, okay? So 2 ways that you can file arbitration, and then you can seek to get paid for chargebacks. Isn't that cool? So I don't know if this is going to work, but this is how I'm going to fight it, okay? If I'm going to have to fight to get my money from Airbnb for some claims, this is where my mind is at. And I think that's important for you guys to know so you can prepare yourselves too, right? So number 8, services rendered would be another reason why somebody could charge back. Somebody could say, I did not receive the service I paid for. And this is kind of a not new thing with Airbnb. Guests will call Airbnb and ask for a refund for something, and documentation is going to be key, right? Now, this documentation might be necessary in the chargeback cycle, but it's really going to be more important for Airbnb because the guest is probably going to seek Airbnb's remedy first, right? A guest is going to call Airbnb and said there's a roach in the house, or the place wasn't clean, or wasn't like whatever, and they're going to try to get payment for that. Now, if Airbnb sides with the host, then it comes back again where the guest mad at Airbnb for siding with the host will go and they will then dispute the charge at the merchant level, okay? Now that Airbnb is disputing the charge at the merchant, or the guest is disputing the charge at the merchant level, then our documentation might matter again for disputing that charge. But of course, Airbnb representing us would use our documentation to show that we provided valuable service. So in that way, we need to be cooperative with Airbnb and have the proper documentation ready to defend services not rendered claims with the chargeback like window. But beyond that, number 9 that you need to know is that world is still all run by Airbnb's terms of service, which could be a tripwire for Airbnb. Because if we have to prove to Airbnb that we provided service, right? And Airbnb says, we are going to pay you this for allowing XYZ person to stay. And if we believe that you provided the service and we sided with you and the guests charge back and we're having to fight that charge back, but we lose that charge back, you can still go to arbitration and claim that Airbnb rewarded you that money or awarded you that money in a dispute with the guest. So Airbnb does believe that you provided the stay according to Airbnb's terms of service. So Airbnb, because the guest is actually Airbnb's guest, it's not yours. And this is something I'll come back to in just a second as I finish this thought. Because the guest is Airbnb's guest and Airbnb puts someone in your home, if you have proven to Airbnb that you provided the proper product, Airbnb owes you the money. The guest doesn't owe you the money, Airbnb does, okay? Now, for any of you who may not understand how deep this goes, Airbnb for the longest time has contractually said that they just mediate the reservation between the host and the guest. Well, that's really not true. And as Airbnb continues to make all these policy changes that give them more overreach, right, with their mediation policies where they can remove money from us, the 50% cancellation penalty if like there's a host cancellation, Airbnb's like governance of cancellation policies, Airbnb's house rules, and all this other stuff that Airbnb's done to protect guests. Airbnb's use of the algorithm and guest favorites to give performance-based like presence on the first page. There's a dozen or more things that if I went to arbitration against Airbnb, I could say these 12 reasons are why the contract that they claim between me and the guest exists does not. I am slave to Airbnb's terms of services, their governance, their oversight, their penalties, all these different things. I am I am in contract with Airbnb and they're making all these like authority-based claims. So that means that I don't have a contract with the guest, because Airbnb can override things that me and the guest have agreed upon, so they can put things into play, like a 50% like penalty for the guest canceling. If me and the guest come to an agreement that they're just going to cancel and move on, Airbnb can still block my calendar and charge me 50%. That logic alone allows me to legally argue that Airbnb's contract, their claims, is null and void, which means that I can go to arbitration and tell Airbnb, I've proven to you that this guest reservation was serviced by me to your satisfaction. It doesn't matter what the merchant company says. You still owe me for services rendered because I'm in business with you. If the guest is unhappy with you and charges back, the buck stops with you. That's going to be a pretty common arbitration claim, I'm pretty sure. So that one's going to be a big one. You guys might want to rewatch this video and take a couple of notes when the live is done baking. Now, the 10th thing I want to share with you is more of a philosophical mindset to this. This is absolutely a headwind that is going to piss people off and get people to quit. Airbnb's cancellation change, where strict is gone, right? And your firm is going to be the best thing that you have. That is a headwind that causes people to change. Airbnb's 50% cancellation penalty if you invoke a host cancellation, that is a headwind that causes people to be upset. Airbnb's off-platform and transparency policy that they put into place is another headwind that's causing people to quit. Airbnb's non-circumvention policy, where you can't create new listings after Airbnb does something dumb and shuts a listing down because a guest had a complaint that wasn't valid, and then they suspend your listing and then you can't create a new one to circumvent. That's another reason why hosts are quitting. There are dozens of reasons over the last 5 years, starting COVID on, where people have decided that Airbnb is just not worth it anymore. This is a low barrier to entry business. So if it's easy to get in, it's easy to get knocked out. Does that make sense? So headwinds are good for us if we are the type of person that's decided that we're going to do business in this space, no matter what. This is a very good thing for us. Anybody who plans on being in a business long term wants to have stuff that happens that knocks a bunch of the amateurs out, because they still get market share, right? If there's 1,000 hosts in a market, 200 of them aren't really serious. Well, those 200 stick around and they eat up some of the revenue for the market until something like this happens and they go, oh, I'm out. This is so stupid. How could have I ever wanted to be an Airbnb host? And then they become one of the shitty gurus on Instagram going, hey guys, I'm gonna teach you how to buy a boutique hotel instead, right? The losers move on to something else. So if you decided that you're not a loser and you've got some Spartan fight in you, these are the things that we wait for, because then we adapt. The market may not be our favorite, but we will find a way through, and we'll find a way to adapt. And we'll, like the review policy thing, we're finding a way to deal with the reviews right now, and we will come out on the other side with less hosts, thus more pie for us. Now, this is not just an Airbnb conversation though, right? Some of the changes that have been made in this industry have forced us to go multi-platform, right? Have forced us to lean on VRBO or Booking.com or Marriott Homes and Villas, or to get our own direct bookings. And I do think this is the time that we really need to consider building our own personal brands. And in my mastermind group with my bigger students, we're talking about creating collections, getting 100 hosts together that all embody a very specific product type. So if you're a high-rise host, you can talk to high-rise hosts around the world and create like a franchise style agreement where it's almost like Business Networking International, where you create like a trade agreement where you have one centralized website and a centralized brand for all these high-rise Airbnbs, or like all these cabins, or all these eclectic, or all these hyperlux. Like there's going to be some deviations that are coming from Airbnb's overreach, where we need to lean more and more and more on direct bookings. I do think that that's going to be a thing. So with that said, there was one last thing that was written in a Bigger Pockets article that they were talking about, which is that Airbnb could freeze your account for risk. And I've had 2 of my Airbnb accounts send me emails that says your payouts are no longer frozen. So Bigger Pockets did get that right. Airbnb is like toggling with a system that if you get too many bookings too fast, or if a listing seems to be illegitimate, or you get like a couple bad reviews, let's say you get a couple bad reviews where somebody's like listing not as advertised, Airbnb will freeze the payouts for that listing and investigate you and not flow money to you that they fully expect to have be charged back on. So that'll be like the final frontier of this overreach. And yeah, we're not going to see this with direct bookings. So I'm going to probably start teaching you guys a couple branding tips, because this is one of 6 businesses that I own. And I own a couple internet-based businesses. So advertising online, building a brand online, being able to get your own customers, I will teach you guys how to do that too in the very near future. But thank you so much for watching this video on the 4th of July. You guys are awesome. I'm gonna go to the gym now. And yeah, maybe next week I'll shop for a new MacBook Pro. Dallas, man. I didn't think I'd get robbed out of all places, Dallas, but wrong place, wrong time. See you guys.